Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And prior to starting, I would like to acknowledge that the Municipality of Jasper respectfully acknowledges the Jasper National Park and the Municipality of Jasper are on Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territories, as well as Métis Region 4. This land is the traditional territory, meeting ground, gathering place, traveling route, and home for the Geneza, Nehewak, Anishinaabe, Secwepemc, Stoney, Nakota, and Métis. Going to item 2, additions to the agenda. CEO Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Administration wanted to request one addition to the agenda. We suggest it could be item 7.6, appointments to the Emergency Advisory Committee. There was a email that was sent out to council last night, and I believe I have paper copies of that are either here, but the administration would like to request that that was added, and we suggest that it be added as 7.6.
Any other additions? The deletion of anything? Okay. May I have a motion then to approve the agenda? Councillor Keller, MP, all in favor? The agenda is goes ahead as with those additions. June 4th, Committee of the Whole minutes. Is there any business arising from the minutes? If not, then can we have a motion to accept the minutes for information? Is that? Yeah. Thank you. All in favor? Item 5, presentation 5.1, Community Futures West Yellowhead. Thank you, Nancy.
The turn screen is good.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Robbins from Community Futures West Yellowhead. I realize that this is probably my first opportunity I've had to present to the new council. So I'm going to take this opportunity just to take 30 seconds to tell you about Community Futures. We are a federally funded program through the Government of Canada and what is now known as Prairies Can. We serve the communities of Jasper, Hinton, Edson, Yellowhead County, and the MG of Greenview, the Hamlin Grand Cache, and the surrounding cooperatives and enterprises. We offer business coaching, training, financing, and economic development. While we're funded by the federal government, we also offer a number of programs through the government of Alberta. So we have provincial connections, and also we're owned by the 5 municipalities that we serve. So we're owned partly by the municipality of Jasper. So we have lots of connections with all levels of government. I'm here today to talk to you about a regional project that we are about to start. It is called a triage BRNE, or business retention and expansion. So in economic development, it is a common tool in the toolbox to do business retention and expansion activities. And what this really means is that we systematically go and visit businesses, ask them strategic questions, collate the answers, and then have some data to move forward to work with our businesses on their needs and their wants. We commonly do this in Community Futures. Some of you have participated in our business visits and our business walks, which we do every 6 months. However, an opportunity arose for us to hire a consultant to do what's called a triage BRNE. And a triage BRNE is exactly that. It is at a time of change or crisis when you go in and you take a snapshot of your business community, find out what the needs are, and it really helps you move forward. And as we are on the road to recovery in the West Yellowhead, it's the perfect time for us coming out of the pandemic into the summer months for us to figure out what the needs and the wants are of the business communities that we serve. So I think it's really to realize that with all the changes in the economy right now, businesses are really struggling, and we're at the point that we don't know what we don't know. And so this opportunity has arisen. We have gotten support from Hinton, Edson, and the MG Preview to continue, and we're looking for support from Jasper and Yellowhead County, which is why I'm here at the municipality today to ask for support. So what this will look like is we've hired a consultant that we're working with to do this project. And mainly the reason why we're not doing it on our own is that we want it to be methodologically sound. And sometimes it is important for us to bring in third parties for them to get some really concise data for us. So that is probably much better than we can do at Community Futures, and help that move forward. So we are requesting financial support from the municipality of Jasper for this project, as well as in-kind services, in that someone works from administration or staff to help us support the project. We can easy pitch, so I'll take your questions.
Councillor Kelleher MP.
There we go. Through you, Deputy Mayor Baxter, to Ms. Robbins, thank you for your presentation. Can you explain a little bit when the data is collected, how it will benefit our businesses, how will Community Futures work with businesses?
Well, part of the data is that it identifies both red flags and green flags. By red flags is those businesses that are in crisis. And those are the businesses that we will work with one-on-one. We won't necessarily share that information with you, but it's an opportunity for businesses to get part of our programming and our coaching. And then there's opportunities for green flags. Green flags are the success stories. Those are the people that are looking to expand, maybe to sell their business, or maybe just having a great experience working in business right now. Also, too, then the data will be collected. We will share it with all the partners in the community. So, for example, in Jasper, we will take that opportunity. There are things that fit with Tourism Jasper's mandate, MOJ, Chamber, and ourselves, as well as the Jasper Employment Education Center. And what we won't do all the recommendations. Our goal is to make sure that whatever fits with someone else's mandate, they take that recommendation and run with it. And it's going to be a public document for anyone to use. For us at Community Futures, it will help us guide the recovery programming that we do over the next 3 years. And that's a pretty important piece for us, as we know that financially the next 18 months is going to be especially stressful.
And any question? Thank you to Deputy Mayor Baxter, to Ms. Robbins. So when you're selecting the businesses, because we have a number of businesses that belong to the Chamber, a number of businesses that belong to Tourism Jasper, then we have a number of businesses that are not part of those two organizations. And also we have a lot of home-based businesses. How will the consultants select which businesses to contact, or will it be a variety of all?
It'll be completely random, and it'll be a variety depending on sector and depending on where they're located. If they have a business license, for example, they will be put into the pool. So identification of being a TJ or a Chamber membership really won't matter. It's a random sample of the entire business community. So we work with the consultant and with the municipality to ensure that we get as many businesses on that list to be randomly selected as possible. Business licensing is just one. The consultant has a whole realm of tricks that they can use in their toolbox that they can build a concise list for the region, for the community.
Thank you, Ms. Robbins.
Councillor Lynn? Oh, Wilson.
No, let's go away. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. My question was regarding what made our regional office. I guess it seems as the regional office is the header of this, or was there some other kind of instigation. I think it's a great idea, but is our office the one kind of?
Yes, definitely.
And so,
Community Futures will lead it.
yeah, and other community futures, are they doing similar things?
No, this is, I mean, every community futures office is different. This is an opportunity for us to take advantage of an opportunity. We have done this before. We worked with the town of Grand Cache when they were dissolving and moving into a hamlet, which again, time of change, right? And so we had some snapshot data at that point of transition of where so that we could set the foundation of what's happening in Grand Cache. So we're familiar with this kind of work. Not every community futures office is the same, and other community futures offices have done this, I'm sure, but yeah.
Okay, so we have Edson already on board, Hinton's on board, and you're looking for
Grand Cache is on board as well.
right,
Yeah.
that's right, yeah,
Yellowhead County, I have to go to council in August, but we're pretty sure. So yeah, Jasper.
yeah, okay, and then just how soon would you need the funding?
I'm hoping to, I've been made very clear, and I'm watching the business communities. I'm not doing anything with them over the summer months. They need to make hay while the sun shines. So it'll probably be mid-September after Labor Day that we go into the field for this project. We're just now getting ready to do that. So we need to lay the groundwork for July and August. And whenever it is appropriate for council.
Okay.
Mhm.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Through you to Ms. Robbins, I think you mentioned in one of your responses the issue of jurisdiction, but I'd just like you to clarify the triage indicates, or the report indicates, that the triage will measure the degree of importance that business owners place on issues. Is that to be restricted to issues that are within the municipal domain, and particularly regarding Jasper, since our municipal domain is not as extensive as it is in other municipalities? In other words, might we get responses that indicate issues are matters that are beyond our jurisdiction as a municipality to deal with?
And I'll be very honest with you. Well, first of all, in terms of jurisdiction, we are treating each community in our region separately. We learned a long time ago that what works in one community doesn't work in the other. So each community will have an opportunity to input their own community questions, and then there will be standard questions between all 5 communities, and then we'll be able to collate some data by the West Yellowhead. It's not uncommon when you're doing a BRNE to hear those comments that are against, legislation that, for example, it could be a federal problem that they may put on the shoulders of the municipality, and that happens quite a bit. And I think the reason behind it is that your municipal councillors are the ones who are directly in your community, and they're the easy target, and people lump all the government politicians in together. But I think the importance of this is that collecting data, we realize that even if it's not within the municipality's jurisdiction, it's within somebody's jurisdiction, and we'll be able to take that information and use it appropriately for whatever level of government is needed to be involved.
All right, thank you for that. And my second question, if I may, Deputy Mayor Waxer, you've indicated a financial contribution from the municipality and also in-kind support in the form of a designated staff person. What sort of hours would you anticipate that dedicated staff individual would have to dedicate to this project?
Not a lot, to be honest. Community Futures would be the project lead. We would just like to have someone from the municipality that can review the questionnaire, and then we can have a contact. We have contacts in all our municipalities that we work with quite closely, and we haven't really established that connection really on a designated person in the municipality of Jasper. So from our organizational point of view, that would be wonderful. if we had a person that we could contact and be frequently in contact with about what's happening in Jasper.
All right, again, I appreciate the response. I would request, Deputy Mayor, that before we conclude the discussion, perhaps a member of administration, Mr. Given, probably just respond to that question of capacity. It sounds like it will be somewhat limited, but I hesitate to commit staff resources without having heard from administration that they have the capacity to manage it in the way that's expected by the applicant. So thank you for that. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. CEO Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. To the mayor's question, I think within administration, there wouldn't be a particularly big challenge in managing this. Sounds like the survey will be conducted in the fall, which is giving a little bit more of a busy time for administration with respect to budget. But my understanding of the scope of the project or the amount of support that would be needed from administration is really just of a coordinating nature. And so I don't foresee any challenges in administration supporting that or identifying contact.
Thank you. Councillor Kelleher-Rendy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, through you to Mr. Given. Do we have some funding within our reserves that we could use for this project?
Councillor Keller MP, through Deputy Mayor Waxer, administration would, if committee wished to recommend that council fund this, a way that you could do that would be to make that recommendation today. Although I do hear that there are other municipalities that won't be providing their confirmation support until August. There's a presentation scheduled for Yellowhead later in the summer. So it sounds like we potentially do have some time. But if council even wanted to forward this to the council meeting next week, you could make that motion sort of a append at the end of it and direct administration identify an appropriate funding source. That way we could ask Ms. Malachek to identify which source might be appropriate. I am aware that there are a couple of different areas where we may have capacity within the budget. So, but we just like to have that time to give you a solid recommendation rather than sort of an off the cuff today.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Councillor Wilson.
Well, thank you, Councillor Keller. I was going to ask that same question, but now I am willing to make the motion that we recommend to council that we support financially as well as in-kind support to Community Futures West Yellowhead for the triage BRE, and that we direct administration to find an appropriate funding source to return to council or regular council next week.
Any debate? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Motion carried.
Thank you very much. Everyone have a great summer.
Thank you, Ms. Robbins. We now have a second presentation from the Jasper Local Food Society. Welcome.
Good morning and hello. Does that work? My name is Sasha Galitsky. I'm presenting today on behalf of the Jasper Local Food Society on the issue of food security in Jasper. We have two goals today. The first is to bring your attention to the issue of food security in our community. And the second is to start the conversation about what we can collectively do about it, including opportunities for council to explore. If you do have the slide presentation we submitted last week in front of you, that'd be great. If not, I'll try to make it make sense regardless. Okay, so moving on to slide number 2, that's the one with the arrows. So this conversation started a couple of weeks ago on June 13th. Lisa from Community Development facilitated a meeting of a bunch of different groups, all related to food around the community. 13 people attended, and it ended up being a 3-hour meeting, although it was supposed to be 1 or 2 hours. We had a lot to talk about. It was a really exciting conversation. Some of the main things that came out of that conversation or that we discovered as we were talking was that there was a lot of overlap in issues and opportunities between the different groups dealing with food in Jasper. I've highlighted 3 of those, the main groups here on the slide. That's Jasper Local Food Society, that's us. We manage the community gardens and the food market, or sorry, the farmers market, the food bank, and also the food recovery program. There were also representatives from some other community organizations like GPL and community outreach from the meeting. Like I said, we came up with a lot of, as we were kind of going around the table, sharing our experiences and our concerns, we came up with a lot of, we kept landing on the same problems and the same issues that we were all confronting and facing in our own respective ways. And we also kept coming up with these opportunities for improvement and to address these concerns that we were all kind of approaching from our own angles. And so the idea was floated that we form some type of alliance or hub to bring together these different groups of people in kind of pursuit of harnessing our collective action, pooling resources, pooling time in pursuit of kind of a broader solutions to food security issues in our community. So that's why that food hub little thing is in the middle. It's a new thing. It's in development. That's not the focus of today's conversation, but I did want to bring it up as a kind of a demonstration of the energy momentum that's building behind these issues. I think I speak for everyone that was at that meeting that day, that it was a really inspiring conversation. And we're all pretty excited to move the ball forward in terms of addressing food security in Jasper. Now, I wanted to move to what food security or insecurity looks like in our community. So move on to the next slide, challenges. So there are many facets to food security, especially in a remote mountain town like ours. As I'm sure you can imagine, we're pretty far away from things. We have a short growing season, also not a lot of space to grow. And getting, food in from other places has some challenges with how remote we are. But these are the 4 key areas of concern that came out of our conversation on the 13th that I wanted to highlight for you guys. First up, I'm sure you're all aware, we have a pretty high cost of living here locally, and that's creating a lot of financial stress and what's becoming dependent use of the food bank and food recovery programs. From my understanding, I think historically the food bank was used primarily as a kind of a transitionary source of food support. And what we're seeing is that that use is becoming more dependent. So we have it sounds like over 30 families who are using the food bank, not as a way to make ends meet temporarily through a transition, but they're using the food bank dependently as a way to feed their families and with no end in sight. Food recovery program, they used to have to advertise to get enough people in the door to take the food that they've recovered. What they're seeing now is lines out the door and the food goes immediately. So I think those were really, hearing those stories from the food bank and food recovery in this conversation are really powerful for me personally. I didn't realize the extent of the food insecurity in our community. And that kind of brought us to a place of well, what can we do about this? What are the resources we have as a community and within this conversation, but broadly speaking in a community, to address this food insecurity? I think there's, like I said, there's a lot of facets to that. I'm only going to get into the areas that the Jasper Local Food Society specifically is really involved in today, but I hope that we can have a conversation about more broad facets of addressing this longer term later on. But for today, the things I wanted to highlight were, I'm going to jump around on the slide a little bit here, but the lack of local food production or growing opportunities. Obviously, we live in a national park. There's some pretty real barriers to growing in Jasper. But I think we have shown through the community garden that we run at Jasper Food Society that it is possible. There's a way to do it. But it's the community garden is already pretty maxed out. We've had a wait list, I think, since its inception. There's much more demand for growing space than we are able to meet. And we would really love to be able to expand that opportunity for Jasperites to grow their own food. Related to that is compost. We are blessed with a lot of food coming through town with our tourism economy, but a lot of that food ends up in the landfill or in our compost program that doesn't work particularly well in transitioning that waste into functional compost. we don't have great soil here. So in terms of growing locally, if we could translate that food waste into compost that we could use to build soil, I think there's a lot of opportunity there that's currently being wasted to support, one, better use of waste, but also growing our soil and growing food production opportunities. And finally, one thing that kept coming up in this conversation was volunteer burnout. Most of these organizations are partially or entirely run by volunteers. It's often the same people. And so there's, I think, a need, broadly speaking, for support for, like, these groups are carrying most of the load in supporting food security or addressing food insecurity in our community. And I think a lot of those systems are somewhat maxed out in terms of that volunteer burnout aspect. So we talked a lot about like what we could do about it. Obviously, that's a pretty big one to fix, but I did want to call it out because it is, there's a lot of community members depending on programs that are built on a pretty shaky foundation of volunteers that are pretty strapped for time and energy. So let's move on to opportunities. I think that, like, I could probably talk about opportunities for half an hour. I know I probably only have like 1 or 2 minutes left, so I'll try to keep it short. I think broadly speaking, that top part of the slide is what we'd like to encourage the municipality to explore, broadly speaking. So that's exploring opportunities for the municipality to support coordination, administration, and mobilization of food security focus groups. And that would help with that volunteer aspect, fundraising, and just kind of making sure that these organizations are supported in addressing food insecurity in our community. For today's purposes, I just want to call that out broadly, but I do want to make a couple specific asks on behalf of Food Society specifically for today. And those are, one, to invest in compost infrastructure and operation so that we can build a functioning compost system. There's also community education part so people understand what composting means, how to do it. I think that's a big piece of it. And the second ask is really for space. We are, Jasper Food Society, we've proven that we can run a community garden. We know how to produce food, even in a challenging place like Jasper, but we need space. Like, the community garden is maxed out. We have a wait list, we always have. There's a lot of demand to grow your own food. I think that would really help with these issues, but we can't do that without space. And that's one really key area where the municipality has a crucial role to play in supporting us and supporting our community. I'll stop it there for the moment. We are more than happy to answer questions, and I look forward to chatting further.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I'll turn it over to council for questions, and I see Councillor Wilson has a question.
Just speak to the, I guess you asked about composting infrastructure. Where's the break in our composting, our composting system now? Like that, what can we do better in that regard?
It sounds like we're collecting compost, but it's not collected in a way that is easily transmittable into soil. And unfortunately, we have a couple of composting experts on Food Society, one of whom couldn't join today, and one of whom I believe is on Zoom, but I'm not sure he can contribute to the discussion. Okay, yeah, if Ryan could join us for this part of the conversation, that would be, he's much more of an expert than we are. I'll just sum up, but to say, like, I think I'd be happy to get you more information on that later on if we're not able to connect with Ryan.
Hello.
Hello, Ryan.
Is my audio coming through?
Absolutely.
Okay, I apologize. I actually had to, I'm out at a farm right now, and I just had to run away, so I actually missed the question.
Hey Ryan, this is Sasha. The question was about compost and what are the issues with the existing system, if I understood Councillor Wilson correctly.
Oh, okay. Well, to be honest, I feel like once when the program first started, there was more hands-on tending to it. And then over the last few years, my understanding is a highway employee is basically the one tending it. So it hasn't really been babied as much maybe as it needs to be. So one of the big problems I found is a lot of the inputs. We have way too much of food waste and not enough carbon in there. So we're not getting a proper balance of nutrients and stuff. So there are definitely ways we can amend the recipe. And I was really happy to hear at our meeting on the 13th that we just got a sifter. So that will be a really big boost. So yeah, I think the biggest issue is just getting the recipe right, and we're on track with the new sifter, and hopefully it'll be on its way. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Ryan, if I may just to follow up, that's great to hear. Like when I read infrastructure, you know, as serving on the waste management, Yellowhead waste management, we were discussing an actual building, a regional building that we could use as composting, but it sounds like that's not really 100% necessary. It's just more so care and maintenance of the composting piles in the existing transfer station that we have now. Like from when I read invest in compost infrastructure, I was concerned, are we talking about like a large warehouse covered building, or are we talking about just maintenance of the piles? And that's what it sounds like.
I definitely feel like that's the best place to start. Like if we can get other municipalities have it outside all over the place. So compost happens outside. So I don't feel like there's a reason why we have to go to an indoor. But yeah, I think just managing the recipe. If we do really want to go commercial scale, you know, we can fine tune it and do partially indoors over, but no, I think it's just more of even just hiring a trained person to manage the recipe or train the current person.
Councillor Wilson.
I guess just to follow up to administration, Mr. Given, we don't, as a municipality currently, have that as our scope, in our scope of work, do we?
Sure. Thanks very much, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, the waste transfer station where the composting happens is currently a Canada facility, and so it is sort of managed by them. There's collaboration between the municipality and parks in the operation of that, but it is currently their site, even though we collect things and take them to that site. With respect to composting, the delegation is correct that we've recently bought a new sifter, which has sort of improved our ability to ensure that the items that are going in are sort of the appropriate size and return it properly. Administration has also recently sent some of our municipal operations staff to specific composting training. And I think one issue that we might need to be aware of is that as a municipal operation, we might have a higher sort of standard for liability and risk that we have to be aware of. Certainly if we were intending to generate compost that was going to go back into food service, you know, or into production of food at what is essentially a commercial scale. If you could imagine the amount of compost that would be generated by Jasper, the standards that might apply and the rules that might apply to us could be significantly different than those that might apply to somebody who's doing it on their own private property, or, you know, at their home at a smaller scale. So I think the composting issue is certainly an opportunity that we have in Jasper, maybe a unique opportunity because of the amount of inputs that we would have, but we would have to ensure that we're doing it at the standards that are expected of a commercial operation and of a municipality, and that would take some research, certainly not impossible. And the second point is certainly about active management of the recipe, as Ryan highlighted. I think that takes actual time and dedicated effort, and administration would have to assess what that would look like. And then I think the final point is probably about the inputs. Contamination of compost really can ruin it. We see that in our recycling streams, where people are putting things that can't be recycled or dirty things in the recycling stream, and it can ruin an entire batch of otherwise recyclable materials. And I think we have to assume that there's at least some of that happening in the composting stream, where people are putting in things that they assume can be composted, maybe because they're materials that are marked compostable, which are actually not compostable, they're decomposable, landfill compostable for this type of purpose. And so there are a couple of different levels, sort of regulatory, the source inputs that are coming from the public, and then the sort of ongoing operations. None of those are insurmountable. All of them would take some research and some effort, but again, none of them are insurmountable.
Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Baxter. My question is either to Ryan or Mr. Gibbon. Last year, the community garden came to council regarding the AMA building area, and that time they asked for an extended area. Currently, did we get new beds within that area for this year?
No, that new area is still yet to be built. We're waiting approval from some more bylaws. I don't know. I guess we didn't apply for the permits on time, so we're still waiting for that. And I haven't got an update. The area will be used more for a storage area for a garden shed because we lost the use of the AMA building. And there will be a plot for the community or food recovery or food bank in that area. But we're still waiting for it. John?
Ryan, may I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbon, at that time, I think, came to the last council, we had directed administration to look at other areas, and I was wondering how that went.
I don't have the report at hand. I do remember that the administration looked at a couple of different areas at least, and the expansion at the current site was sort of the third one. We could dig up that report from last year. I know that there are other opportunities, and the council decided that this was a priority to identify new locations. That's something administration would take.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Hall.
No, go ahead, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and thank you for your presentation today. I have a couple of questions, maybe some comments. When I hear that 30 families use the food bank every week, that's heartbreaking. As someone who's used the food bank in the past, I understand how hard it is to live here and how expensive it is to live here. As far as space, has there been a consideration of opening up their yards or municipality incentivizing locals to, like I thought about this a lot over the weekend, and I was in my front yard and I have space for probably 8 beds, but I just wonder what that would look like in insurance zoning. I'm not really sure how that would be.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know when I earlier said that there are many facets to kind of building a local food system, like we kind of came to you with asks for council specifically, but I think there is a lot of opportunity to increase growing on, I guess, what I would call private spaces. And we actually do have kind of a fledgling program to connect people with yard space that they're willing, or that maybe already be converted to garden space, and either garden it themselves, or if they don't have the ability or time or whatever to garden it themselves, and have another community member who wants to grow and connect the two and kind of be a connection point for those types of relationships to increase growing on private spaces. I think, and I wanted to, that's an answer to your question. Can I make one other comment?
Absolutely.
I appreciate that you've looked at kind of spaces available for growing. Being able to expand the existing community garden would be a great blessing. I think we're thinking bigger scale, if that's something that municipality is willing to consider with us. And that would be, potentially having space for greenhouses. And we've been looking into grants to find funding to build out infrastructure like that. But in terms of our ask that you guys consider food society and growing spaces in your kind of municipal space planning, I want to call out that we would love to get a lot like larger footprints, and it doesn't have to be like one big spot. It could be like different spots, or maybe spots that aren't are really hard to use for other purposes. Maybe they don't have road access, maybe they're funny shaped, maybe they're just in weird places in town. Like, we're not picky, we'll take whatever. If it's a piece of ground and we could, you know, put up a fence, put up a greenhouse, we're happy to do that work. We're gonna look for the funds for it. But any little plots of ground that we could use that the municipality could help us with, we would love to have that type of support so we could run with it.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you for that. And another question, and I, as also the person who fully understands volunteer burnout, it sounds like, I'm assuming I know the answer already, but it sounds like there could be a full-time position for this crisis we're in. I feel like it's a bit of a crisis. Would that be, you know, years ago we had a environmental steward position with the municipality, like, are there grants we could look at to potentially fund a position or keep this going? Volunteers do burn out, but I feel like the volunteers in this society won't have a choice but to keep going because you're feeding families.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a really wise call out, and I appreciate your experience in the matter. Yeah, that is something we've talked about. I think having that type of support would be really meaningful for the community. I personally don't have a lot of experience with council and local government, so this is an area that I'm learning a lot about. But from what I understand, like, some kind of position or collaboration could be really meaningful.
Other questions? Councillor Wilson.
I guess a question or would go to Mr. Given. Does the energy manager position that we hired, would that position come into play here? Like, would we be able to task that individual with returning to council with some compost recommendations, you know, how we could streamline, how we can, you know, just on an aside, I spent a lot of time at the transfer station, and Ryan's correct, like, it's all food piles, and that's really hard to compost, yet just down the road at the transfer station, there's yard waste, and all of that stuff would be ideal to bulk out the compost, and yet that doesn't get mixed in to it. So back to the question, would that position that we have hired, Mr. Given, be able to, could we task him with returning to council with some optimization of our composting?
I think the very direct answer would be no. The position is jointly funded, and so it's responsible for 2 municipalities and has very specific deliverables in the first year focused around municipal operations and actually the energy use in municipal facilities. So I think that if this was an area that council wanted to have more municipal resources dedicated towards, that would be a budget 2023 discussion. I guess my recommendation to council would be, if you're interested in the presentation that was made today, then this might be the type of thing that you would want to refer to administration and ask the administration to come up with recommendations on how you could approach solving issues. Not necessarily solving issues, because I think we're unlikely to solve them around council table today. But certainly we have capacity within the organization to come back with recommendations on approaches to working towards this. I know that the presenters have given sort of 3 very specific things that they would like municipal administration, council to support. Those would be the types of things that you could refer to municipal administration for reports back. And just in terms of the sort of cycle of development, you know, identifying solutions to some of these challenges. Council will appreciate maybe more complex. You know, there was some discussion about approvals for different types of buildings within our municipal planning sort of use of land. We all know that that's a pretty complicated issue. Again, not intractable or unsolvable, but it is the type of thing that would take some thought. And so this is sounding like there may be a need for a co-created overall strategy for what it is we're actually trying to achieve, and then a strategy with an action plan that has, you know, resources and everything else. So I think if the committee is interested in following up on the ideas that are presented here, a first step might be to refer that to administration, because we don't have dedicated in-house resources right now that would be appropriate for this, other than in our operations department. As I referenced, we do have one of our staff who's recently taken some provincial training and certification on composting. So we do have some in-house expertise on the regulations that apply, at least on that side. But all of these other issues about zoning, use of land, volunteer burnout, and the amount of resources that are available within the community are probably bigger issues than we're likely to solve in the immediate term. Certainly things that could be referred to budget if there are costs associated with it.
Councillor Kelleher, MP.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and to ladies, I just want to thank you for all your work that you've done and for all the volunteers. And I have a question. For the community garden, when you have abundance of vegetables and food leftovers, that goes to the cupboard.
Yeah, again, Ryan would be able to speak to this better than I. But yes, my understanding is we do kind of keep recovery in mind. I don't know if it's active at the moment, but historically that we've done a grow a row program. So one row of your plot would be for donation to food bank or food recovery. So yeah, we are involved in, making sure that is shared.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah, no, she's totally correct. Short answer, yes, we do. Or we try our best.
I just wanted to speak to the concept of the hub. I wanted to offer congratulations. I think that isn't always an easy thing to come together with one common goal, and I appreciate the wisdom that went into to doing that. Thank you.
Let me make one final comment on that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Gibbons spoke to the possibility of kind of a future of coordination, and I think one of the main benefits of a hub that I see are having a central point of coordination on the community side, because there are so many different organizations on the community side all dealing with various food issues. And I think one thing the hub could do is, like, as we're building out a hub, maybe hopefully you guys could build out a new position, and then the two could work together on kind of a more efficient collaboration towards some of the solutions we're talking about, rather than, a coordinator on your side trying to work with like 3 or 4 different entities, all of which are volunteers with who knows what schedules. So I'm hopeful that if you guys can kind of support on that side, we can build out our hub idea. It's brand new, but it is in development. And hopefully in the future, we could have that on our side to really support that coordination and collaboration.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I just wanted to thank all of the presenters for that presentation and bringing these matters to our attention. I am persuaded by Mr. Gibbons' comments and am prepared to make a motion that committee direct administration to explore opportunities for the municipality of Jasper to support food security efforts in Jasper and report back to a future meeting of Committee of the Whole. That is essentially the first of the opportunities identified by the presenters. But I think those opportunities necessarily will include at least potentially investment in compost infrastructure and operations, community education, and increased opportunities for further production. So I think the first bullet is probably sufficient to get administration started, and that report then could look at, as we've discussed, a coordination effort administration efforts and mobilization. I'm really intrigued by Ryan's comments about the recipe for compost, and clearly our position through operations, and legitimately so, has been to get weight out of the landfill. And so we have been educating people and pushing for food waste to be composted. I had never considered the addition of carbon because I don't think we were actually trying to build the compost so much as we were trying to reduce the weight and going to the transfer station and to the landfill. So it's an interesting look, but Mr. Greathead and his crew do have experience in this, and I think it's appropriate that we direct administration and probably operations to consider it further and come back to us, and then speak again with the presenters after we get that report. So that is my motion. Thank you.
Any debate? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was very informative for all of us, and we appreciate your time and passion on this issue. I think we move on then to the department reports from the Municipal Energy Manager. Well, welcome, and
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I just wanted to do a little bit of an
that's what I was just going to ask you to do.
For council, for the community, as far as Khan has joined the municipality as a municipal energy manager. Councillor Wilson sort of brought up that point earlier. I said, well, he's here, we can ask him. But he's here to make an introduction to council, his first time presenting council, so please be easy on him. He comes to us from the private sector, filling a similar role in an industrial setting previously. We're really happy to have him and his experience joining the municipality of Jasper and the town of Hinton in this shared position. And I guess one thing that I would do for all of you, so Surprise doesn't have to do it himself, is that everything that he's doing for us, he's also doing for Hinton. And so he's got double the workload, but maybe the same amount of grant funding. We'll put it that way. But I'll turn it over to Faraz to make a presentation to council.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Given. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and finally meet you all in person. It's been a little bit different with COVID nowadays, but things are getting back to normal, so that's nice to see some faces. Yeah, like Mr. Given said, I'm a shared position between Hinton and Jasper. So today's presentation for you is to kind of give you an overview of what are my deliverables for the first year and what's the update so far. So what have I been up to? So I'll just jump your attention to the agenda package. And if you look at the slide that says Journey of a Municipal Energy Manager, on the left, there's a little roadway, and it's these are kind of the main deliverables of year one. They are not in chronological order, but this is something what you can expect, starting from introduction to stakeholders, which is basically you, the municipality staff, and community members, which I've been going through in the past little while. An energy policy or an energy charter for projects or facilities that I'll be focusing on, identifying some of the main users, collecting the data for energy consumption, electricity, natural gas, and the associated greenhouse gas emissions as well. Going over benchmarking these facilities over similar facilities in Alberta to see how we're doing at the moment, and moving on to identifying an opportunity. So an energy scan is a one level below a audit. So we already were able to do one for the activity center. So we've identified the opportunities, make a list of all the opportunities. And then when we go to the next one, which is EMP, stands for the Energy Management Plan. It's going to be a plan for a period of maybe like 2 to 3 years, depending on the opportunities, on how you can implement these ideas or initiate these opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases and energy consumption to whatever the targets are. And then the next half was kind of after you've done the initial groundwork, we go into the energy modeling, which is going to track how these initiatives are actually in real time reducing the energy and greenhouse gas emissions in the municipality. Implementing, so ECM stands for energy conservation measures, basically starting to implement these measures. And the modeling comes hand in hand with, if you don't measure it and if you don't quantify it, you don't know if your actions are actually making a difference. So that's what we're going to be doing with the modeling. And stakeholder engagement and reporting, this is a part of that deliverable to report to the council regularly on the progress that's being made, and even with the community through different ways of communication. And finally, finding some incentives to support some of the maybe bigger projects and opportunities that we do identify. And there's a lot of funding out there, which we can probably make use of. Jumping over to the first 90 days of the MEM, again, this is just what I've been doing the first 30 days or so, getting oriented with the municipality, meeting everybody, and getting to know the members of the community and the municipality and understand what opportunities they see. That's usually the most important part to start off with, because they work in these facilities, they operate it, they maintain it. They have a really good idea of where we can make some headway without having to spend too much money. And then the next 30 to 90 days, basically identifying opportunities, doing something called the energy management assessment with some of the key stakeholders to identify what the state of the municipality is specifically in terms of energy management. So what are we doing in terms of incorporating energy management ideas into budgeting and training staff if needed, or even looking into communicating with members on how some initiatives can improve the energy management of the municipality. And then finally get into planning for long-term and short-term and how to implement these ideas. And then in the final sheet there, final page there, I just have 3 columns to talk about what I've currently done and what's going on right now and what you can expect in the future. I've mentioned a few of these already, introduced myself to stakeholders, had conversations with them. I've started collecting, actually already collected energy, the natural gas, electricity consumption for all facilities across the municipality of Jasper, and currently working on benchmarking studies to benchmark these facilities and to see where we stand. And identified some top users, and like I said, conducted a activity, the energy scan of the Jasper Activity Center, and we've identified about 45 opportunities, and currently working on organizing a prioritization meeting with the stakeholders to, identify, okay, what can we implement without having to spend money, maybe change our practices, habits, maintenance practices, and what can we also potentially propose for the renovations of the activity center as an energy conservation measure that would be in the next phase. And then finally, drafting a proposal for a group of an energy team or energy charters for specific projects or opportunities to improve them. And in the next few months, I will be reporting quarterly with MCCA, which is Municipal Climate Action Center, and conducting a energy management assessment with the stakeholders and reporting back on what is the current state of the municipality. And also some quick wins, identifying quick wins, trying to implement them and start working on the energy model. So that's my update for you today. And yeah, feel free to ask me any questions.
Any questions?
No questions, really. Just really looking forward to seeing how this all unfolds, and excited to see when you come back to us and the suggestions that we can improve our facility. Yeah, excited about that. And so where are we at this point? Sorry, I think you probably said that, but where on that roadmap are we now? Are we
Like I said, it's not necessarily in a chronological order, but we're in the, I would say we're in the first half. That's actually building the groundwork of understanding where we are now. Identifying what are the top users, kind of coming up with the assessment of the municipality. So I would say we're in the first half. We've completed maybe 2 or 3 out of those deliverables, and the next month or two, complete the first half, and then move on to the next part, which is actually planning of these projects and how to implement them in the next 2 to 3 years, or that sort of period.
So here's a question. It does say that you'll be reviewing all municipal buildings and facilities. So I would suggest that the wastewater treatment plant would be included. Are you just reviewing, say, electricity and natural gas consumption, or are you looking at other ways to reduce greenhouse gases within those facilities?
Starting point is looking at electricity and gas, because those are the obvious inputs for energy into the municipality. But eventually, I would look into other opportunities that are out there within the municipality, and that's where talking to the stakeholders helps, talking to the municipal employees help, because I've got a lot of ideas in terms of waste reduction and waste to heat, and there's multiple other ideas there, which would be part of my consideration when we look at the long-term plan, because some of these projects might require some more dedicated time and effort to actually identify the scope and the project and the implementation and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up with that same idea too, like electricity and natural gas would be used to even produce our clean water. And we have a situation in town that you may or may not know of, that we have to require, or residents are able to run bleeders. And so you're running water down your drain for 4 or 5 months out of the year, right? So, so clearly, if people weren't needing to run bleeders, the consumption of natural gas and electricity to produce that water would be quite a large reduction. But most likely that might not be within your scope of work, but that's out there as well.
No, you bring up a good point. It is a part of energy management, water consumption, which usually people don't realize. Municipalities that I know of in other provinces who have a well-established energy management plan, started off with electricity and natural gas use, are now starting to actually incorporate water consumption and trying to identify ways to reduce water consumption by actually installing some flow measurements to keep a track of how much is the municipality consuming and how can we implement measures to reduce that alongside electricity and natural gas consumption.
Easy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I can't see Mayor Ireland, so I'm not sure if he was looking for questions. Thank you. Okay, can I have a motion for someone to accept this this update, this report for information? Councillor Kelleher, all in favor? Thank you so much. Moving on then to new business, 7.1, Robson and Lions Park planning.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. As council is obviously well aware, Robson and Lions Parks are important and really well-used community amenities. And in the fall of last year, council dedicated $20,000 total to doing master plans or refurbishment plans for both parks. It has been some time since there's been a dedicated and concerted and coordinated effort to advance the parks. I think there have been some Small examples of reinvestment, particularly in Lions Park with some new playground equipment added there. But I think it's fair to say that overall, neither one of the parks has really seen the sustained effort and focus. The $20,000 that council included in the budget is really essentially for a planning exercise. And just to be clear, this is the beginning of that planning exercise, which will include community involvement in a focused way. And the ultimate outcome is a recommendation of a plan that can inform future municipal budgets and capital planning. So to advance this, administration has engaged WSP to conduct this planning exercise. We're joined today by two members of WSP, Aaron and Rob, I believe, are on the line, and they're going to make a presentation to council. We're looking to get some guidance from community of the whole with respect to the scope and generalized uses. You will see through the presentation there are some maps with some bubbles on them. Keep in mind that none of those bubbles are fixed at this time. They're sort of the consultant's initial observations about how the parks might be currently being used. And we're looking for guidance from you on two different levels. First, if there are any important community uses that you want to see considered in the development of the plans. And identifying those now is important so that our consultant team can incorporate those concepts and trial them with the community. And then the second is around finance. We want to ensure that the plan that our team develops is something that's actually actionable and realistic for the municipality. I think that there's nothing more disappointing than when a fantastic looking plan is developed and then it really is just beyond our means and doesn't get actioned. And I think that leads to disappointment for the community and for the council. And so we are seeking some guidance at an early stage here about what is an appropriate financial scope, just so that we don't let our ambitions get ahead of our practical capacity. Appreciating that financial decisions happen at budget time, so we're not asking for anything final here. And if council wanted to go bigger or go faster, then of course at budget times, you have the ability to do that, to add more money to things. But we do need we need council to establish the playing field that we're operating within, even if it's in a bit of a general sense. And so the consultant team is going to guide you through some of that discussion as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Rob from WSP. I believe we have a presentation for you, and the presentation is in your council packages as well. So Aaron, maybe I'll turn it over to you first.
Great, thanks Bill, and thanks for having us this morning. I'm just going to share my screen. And can everyone see this? Seeing nods. Okay, perfect. So thank you. I'm Erin Toop. For those who don't know me, I live here in Jasper, and I'm joined by my colleague Rob McDonnell, who is the manager of our landscape architecture team in Alberta. So he's really the expert behind parks planning, and then I'm here to steward the process through and manage it on our end, because this project is very near and dear to my heart as a parent of a toddler in town. So as Bill prefaced, we're here to give an overview of the project, namely focusing on our initial observations on both Robson Park and Lions Park. I'll kick things off with a bit of process and timing, and then hand things over to Rob to walk through the meat of it. We're here, our update is really the close off of kind of what we're calling the first phase of what we looked at. So kind of setting the vision and the opportunities and constraints for each park. And so that we're keen to have your input at this phase in the project, because that will help us make sure that we've captured everything going into developing the conceptual plans and engaging with the community, as Bill has said. And to walk through the overviews, I'll hand it to Rob.
Thanks, Aaron. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, great. So yeah, my name's Rob McDonnell. I'm a landscape architect. I've been practicing for about 24 years now, 25, something like that. And I've done a number of projects. I'm not located in Jasper. I'm actually down in Calgary, but I've been lucky enough to work on a number of projects in Jasper, from the daycare center through to the hostel to Centennial Park and the CN stage pavilion. So I'm always really happy to be able to have an opportunity to work back in Jasper, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this through. So anyways, in summation, we have these two different parks, and two very different parks, and which are really interesting. And so the first one we're going to look at is Robson, which has gone over quite a bit of a change over the last while, with a number of trees being removed, et cetera. But it's really interesting from a number of perspectives. One is that it's very close to the heart of what would be classified the historic downtown, or the CBD, Central Business District. And it's also kind of in the hub of a lot of public facilities, from schools through healthcare, through there's obviously the emergency services building right beside it, as well as the library, which is directly adjacent to it as well, which has gone over, obviously had a major overhaul in the last while as well. So the users that are part of this, it's going to be a wide range, from some of the local residents that live adjacent to it, as well as the users of the public facilities, and potentially as well as tourists, which are probably going to be forming a large part of your traffic flow again, now that the COVID restrictions have started to ease off and people are starting to travel a lot more. So yeah, it's a real wide range of users for this. So, some of the things that we're looking at in this phase is it's kind of an opportunities and constraints issue. So one of the opportunities is, as I've already mentioned, is very centrally located in terms of the town itself, and it's a relatively flat site. So there's not a lot of sort of heavy lifting in terms of geographic or geological formations or grade changes, things like that. And it's a very accessible site. It's very open to users of all abilities, whether they have mobility challenges or what have you, and it's walkable from the downtown, et cetera. So it's a very central and a very accessible site. So the constraints are, there's minimal infrastructure going into the park. So anything that we may look at doing, upgrades for electrical or things like that, will have to be brought into the park. So that's a very, always thankful if it's just one item on the constraints. That's a small list. So this is just the map version with graphically illustrating some of the things that we just went through, illustrating that basically most of the trees have been removed off it. So it's a large open green space. The elementary school is directly to the north of it, which is the right. The library is in behind some of our text there. You can see all the residential along the east side, emergency services, and the central business district is just down the road to the left or to the south. There's one of the main things, sorry, could you just go back, Aaron? One of the main things though we did see is there's just a very, very strong line. You can see the yellow dashed line, which goes from the central business district over towards the library. And we call those desire lines, which means no matter where you put the paths, people, if they have the desire, that's where they're going to go through, and they eventually will form a pathway. And that's what's happened through there. So yeah, you can move ahead now if you want. So so in this stage of the design development, we call this the spatial relationships. Sometimes it gets called bubble diagrams, et cetera. And I want to just sort of emphasize, and Bill just mentioned it slightly, is the shapes and sizes you see on here are representational. They're not meant to be exactly the same size. It's more about identifying what the uses would be how they relate to each other through the arrows that are indicated. If it's a larger arrow, it's a stronger connection, where that might happen, and generally talking about the shape. So, you know, in some of the discussions that we're having prior to this with administration, we're just talking about some of the things that could happen in this park. We saw it as, you know, potentially a combination of having it as a large open green space that's unprogrammed, that, you know, we would start to introduce some shaded areas again, perhaps more leaf trees rather than evergreen types of trees and things like that. So gathering areas, as well as areas that may be just open green spaces that allow for unprogrammed recreational activities like kicking a ball or throwing a frisbee or what have you. And then a plaza area for that could, you know, service a number of different types of uses, from sort of community events to educational, time being so directly close to the, you know, directly adjacent to the school to the north, or, you know, just general gathering, whether it's people, whether it's tourists or it's local users during the daytime or even the evening. And the Four Season at that as well too. And then the other thing that you know, we had kind of proposed and thought that might be a nice additional amenity is sort of a garden area that might tie in and be more closely affiliated with the library directly to the west. And so there'd be a connection through there, and it could be an opportunity for any local arbor, you know, or horticultural groups, things like that, to showcase local plantings. It could be educational, a number of things, but it might be something that sort of transitions from the library to a plaza area, which, you know, is a combination, but typically is more hard surfacing, and then as well into the open lawn area. So we've included some imagery that are meant to just be symbolic. They're not meant to, you know, illustrate exactly what the form might look like in the end. So for instance, the plaza, it's, you know, we're talking about an inclusive all season with night lighting. It could contain passive seating, public events, areas for markets, things like that, or educational. The open lawn area, just an unprogrammed open green space. Also can have seating. Probably would have, you know, the path running through it. We always try to honor these desire lines. A lot of times in park planning, you know, we'll just go ahead and put, if we don't know the area, we're trying to figure some things out, we'll just grass it, and then before the paths, not try and put paths in, but just see where people move through, and then that's where the pathway lines go. And then the garden area, as I mentioned just a minute ago, it's meant to be more of a passive area connecting to the plaza and the lawn areas, and so it would include seating and shade areas as well. So big, you know, strong connections from Elm and the school through the plaza to that main pathway, which would sort of, you know, honor the existing desire line. Connections through to Geikie, you know, there might be a promenade along there connecting to the downtown, and by promenade I mean a widened sidewalk, and then, you know, connections from the libraries and the different areas connecting through each other. So I'm thinking we move right through these, and then we'll go back if there's any questions, right, Aaron? So Lions Park, completely different park in the sense that it's basically, you know, it's tucked up into the southwest corner of town more, and very much a locals used or driven park. So it's the majority of local families, a lot of younger children, you know, using this. It's low density residential, meaning single family throughout the area. And it's got a multitude of facilities in it that have just kind of, over time, as I understand it, just been, you know, kind of have dropped into it. So some of the opportunities that are existing there, as we saw it, is there's already some existing playground equipment that could be repurposed potentially. Some of it's older, some of it's, you know, been around for a while, but it's fan favorites like this one. Erin's filled me in, like her daughter, who's photographed here, loves it and goes automatically to the plane. So, you know, maybe that's something that we look at reusing, and it'll have some reference and a continuation for people, a bit of historic value, I guess, for lack of a better term. it has existing servicing, it has power. That's an opportunity. That's great. We don't have to bring anything in. And it has some topography. The topography, as you'll see, is listed under constraint because obviously people that have mobility issues, or there's some other, it takes away potentially from space. If you're looking for unprogrammed space, it can limit, you're dealing with grades. Sometimes it's more costly when you're dealing with grades to do developments. But in this case, maybe it's an opportunity where we can talk about things like sliding hills or what have you. And it also acts as a nice sort of separation of spatial uses from, one area, because it's on another, it's sort of plane, it's different than in another area. And some of the constraints are, and I can't read, I can't even remember what we wrote here, but it says playground equipment, and I got to move it. Styles vary. There it was. So there wasn't a consistent or sort of over, a complete review, view that, like I said, there's just been sort of, as money became available, as I understand it, or projects and sponsors, the equipment got put in over the course of time. And perhaps it's not the best use of equipment or the best designed in terms of space where it's put, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, Aaron, that's good. Yeah, if you want to go back one. Again, this is the existing, so we can see in the blue areas with the sort of the faded white, all the different little playground areas, and I think we've even missed a few. The two squares / rectangles are with the word playgrounds are the two of the newest ones. The rest are more legacy ones that were put in prior to. We do have some existing trees, a lot of older trees, and that some of them have been cut down, some have been replanted. Throughout the area, we have the small shelter still there. And then the basketball courts are up on that other area. They're kind of set up on the area above. It does have the fence going all the way around it. With that, I think that's predominantly for elk management, as I understand it, keeping them from going in. And we have a number of connections through, as you can see, the yellow lines through the gates. Yeah, we can go to the next one, Aaron. So this one's a little less, obviously it's a lot more dense in terms of what we may be thinking in terms of usage and the way that things are, all the different types of uses may get compressed here a little bit more. So, one of the things that we were kind of told that we would want to do and move this is to have this more as a destination playground area for the locals. And so in terms of the bubble diagram relationship plan, the destination playground is the most important thing, and it's going to have the highest value. So it's shown as largest, and generally speaking, that's where it would probably best be suited and fit into the plan. There are other uses, though, that we think if we can consolidate the playground area and do some better space management here, is to have some other areas where some of the locals may just gather. We have the seating viewing area. We have some area for unprogrammed, just open green space where we have down in the bottom right hand there. Perhaps, and you can see there's maybe at that point another opportunity for some gathering where parents can sit and watch their children play or what have you. And then perhaps on the top area, we call that more of a programmed recreation area. And there might be a break in terms of sort of a demographic in the way that you would do playground designs for, sort of age brackets. Perhaps that is more recreation themed area for, say, teens, preteens, and adults, even, where the basketball courts get retained, and we could add other actively themed features like climbing walls. We just showed an image of a climbing wall as a what if kind of. So the playground, we kind of are looking at it, and thinking that, again, with the change in the grades, that maybe there's an opportunity for a small sliding hill, something like that in there to tie in. And then looking at other types of playground structures that may coordinate with what's there now, in repurposing some, especially the new ones, into more of a playground theme that suits Jasper, I'll say, sort of active play, naturalized playgrounds using wood features or, you know, natural features like logs and things like that. And yeah, I think that's about it. And again, like I said, I just want to reiterate, and Bill's already said that the size and the shapes, this is not necessarily what the final form will look like, but it's a bit of a high level shopping list where we're putting down what we think are the right types of spaces and uses for those space and how they may relate to each other in terms of the layouts. So that's it. And I think Aaron wants to sort of talk a little bit about how we may look at some of the funding models for this with the town moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And I think Bill has prefaced this already. Really, we're just hoping to make sure that our concept is kind of aligned with your expectations around the level of investment with each park. So this last slide just offers some example funding scenarios for you to consider. Maybe the funding scenario you have in your head isn't on the slide, and that's great feedback too, but just as a couple of examples of level of investments that we were considering, A would be kind of the low end, assuming the municipality contributes $250,000 over 10 years. B would be $500,000 over 10 years, so that's $50,000 per year. C would be a $500,000 contribution from the municipality over 10 years, plus the assumption that some fundraising or grant funding could be included, whether that's all at one time, as I've shown it on the timeline here, or kind of sprinkled through. And then D would be sort of the top end example of $500,000 from the municipality and $500,000 in fundraising or grants. So these are just scenarios at this point, but wanted to just even get your early feedback on whether any of these are in alignment or potentially horrifying you, so that we can be informed as we develop our concepts. So I can come back to this slide again through the discussion, but we'd want your feedback on each park as well, level of investment that you might consider for Robson Park and level of an investment that you may consider for Lions Park, because we're looking at them discretely. Next steps for us are developing the conceptual plans and then moving on with community engagement. So I think the other prompt that Bill had given that I'll just reiterate was that we're also considering what important community uses might occur in these parks and consequently also what some of the key community stakeholders might be. And I know I was listening for the presentation from the local food society, so kind of curious if there's a circle back there already. But that's the end of our presentation and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for an excellent presentation, and I'm open the floor to questions from council. Councillor Wilson.
Just top of mind, the funding scenarios were in front of me, and so it is kind of drawn out for about 10 years, but I'm suspecting the money would be needed at the start of that continuum rather than further on. So why wouldn't the funding scenario suggest how much we're willing to commit to the project, and that money is going to be spent, I would suspect, within 2 years rather than 10 years. So I don't know, I'm just confused a little bit by why is it drawn out. I think the project costs are going to come in within 2 years, not 10 years. So why wouldn't we be asking for the total amount of what's going to be spent on the park rather than a 10-year scenario?
I can take a stab at that and then I'll pass it to Bill if he has anything to add. But I think preliminarily in scoping this project, we were thinking that it would likely be a 10-year horizon that council might want to invest in the parks over. But if that is, we're happy to accept that feedback that it might be an earlier and larger investment. Again, the scenarios were just kind of using a 10-year timeline because that was what we were aiming for, but we're happy to take that feedback on the level of spend. And so if the timeline is kind of confounding things, then I think just generally, you know, is it a $250,000 investment or is it about $1 million investment, including fundraising and grants? That's helpful input for us at this stage as well.
And just to add to that, you know, one of the things when we go through the, you know, as we're gathering information, we go through this process and we get through the conceptual design phase, is that, you know, working with the budget in mind, is that sometimes, or many times, we're asked to provide a phasing plan. And so we, at this point, we don't know that, we don't have that information. We're just sort of, you know, starting the process. So, you know, they might be $500,000 or $1 million park or whatever it is. And the first phase is, you're correct in saying, okay, well, the first phase is really expensive. So how much is that going to cost? And then from that, at that point, then you can really sort of get into the more of the budget cycles or where the grants come in and things like that. So I guess it's just at this point, we're just saying, maybe it's a 10-year build out, but the first 5 years or 2 years after the plans have been submitted, and then spades are going to go on the ground in 2 years. Money's been gathered, grants have been applied for, etc. The money's in place, and then from that point on, it's $25,000 or $10,000 a year over 10 years to complete the park.
CAO Devin.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So first off, this is exactly the kind of dialogue that we're hoping to have. And again, just to confirm, we're not looking for council to make final decisions here, but to give some guidance about what your level of comfort is, knowing what you know today. Obviously, you'll see more in terms of better developed plans and more detailed plans. And then you'll have to consider these projects in the context of the overall municipal budget. And that will happen at budget time. But we're looking for that early guidance of, is this a $250,000 plan exclusively using municipal funding? Is it a $1 million plan exclusively using municipal funding? Is it a $1 million plan using some municipal funding and the expectation that others need to contribute funding? And so we're looking for that kind of dialogue here about, and again, not necessarily looking for, although the report, the RFP does make a recommendation, any guidance that you can provide us will be helpful. I do want to highlight one specific difference is, you know, does council have an expectation that we would seek funding from outside sources to contribute towards this? Again, we don't need to get into the detail, but you could imagine that in each park that might be slightly different. Lions Park, we have an existing agreement with the Lions Club. Administration has had some early discussion with them. And I think that they would be open to identifying, you know, and maybe conducting a fundraising opportunity. I think they would like to have a reason for being and a purpose, and identifying improvements to the park that would benefit the community might be something that they could really get behind and do some fundraising. We of course couldn't count on when that money would come in, but is that something that council wants to entertain and set a bit of an expectation? Because I think the park could be designed in such a way that there would be improvements that could happen at a later stage in development that would give the club some time to do some fundraising. With respect to Robson Park, it doesn't have that same kind of existing relationship, but given the community focal point that it is and the high profile nature of it, there might be some opportunity to partner to find external grants or contributions. So that one essential question of scale, you know, is council telling us go big or go home? Or are they saying, you know, let's take a moderate approach? And is council telling us that we should build in some expectation of funding from outside sources? Those two questions I think are fairly essential for creating that playing field, so we know what we're operating within. And in terms of the way that it's laid out in the diagram of you know, 50,000 for 10 years, for example, that could be 4 years of building $50,000 a year, so that we have 200,000 available in the fourth year to go and do a major project. Or it could be front-end loaded with appropriate improvements done under borrowing, under debt financing with a 10-year borrowing. You know, so there are a number of different ways to approach approach the project. But again, we just want to make sure that we, as administration, didn't underplay council's level of interest by going with the smallest possible project. We also didn't want to set council up with an expectation, or the community up with an expectation, that this was going to be a really major project when that wasn't in alignment with which might be. So this kind of dialogue is really helpful.
Councillor Kelleher MP.
Just to follow up on that, I really like the idea of going for some funding outside, like the Rotary Club. Often we'll go to town, you'll see a Rotary Club park, and the same at Lions. So I do like the idea of going out to our partners in town and seeing if people are willing. I have two questions. I have one question on the Robson Park. This past couple of winters, we had a nice skating surface for all the young kids, and I have to say, I've never seen anything used more. I've seen the schools over there, I've seen all our new Canadians, and it was very exciting to see all the young kids learning to skate. Would that be part of the Robson Park project?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, actually, I'll let Rob sort of comment on that, but I think that's the type of discussion we're hoping to have here. If councils can identify things that you've appreciated about the way the park has been used, either the space that has been used, that you'd like to see continued, then that would give Rob some guidance on the types of uses that he should be including. Rob, do you have anything else to say on that?
Yeah, and just to confirm, I think I heard, this sounds a little muddy, but I think I heard somebody say there's been some skating, there's a skating facility there, and it was really well used, and wondering if that can be part of the facility moving, or part of the development moving forward. Is that what I heard correctly?
That's
okay. Yeah, absolutely. I understand. I think that they were temporary boards that would get put up and then pulled down. So that's something that can 100% be considered. The other, there's other ones. I just finished a park where we had sort of a depressed area that it was, the water was retained. They would just plug the drain at the bottom and then it would be flooded. A little harder on the grass. That's a detail to be worked out. But these are the types of discussions that we're exactly hoping for, that, the inputs and saying, well, this is something I'd like to see happen there. And, the fact that you're, alluding to all the user groups, the different types of people that were using it, I think is what ultimately makes a park successful. When you have, especially something like that, where you have all these different types of user groups and demographics, et cetera, that should be using it. And if it's not getting used, there's a problem. So if there's something that's been really successful in the past, we should definitely be considering it moving forward.
The other thing that I think would be really great in the Lions Park is the spray park for the young kids. It seems to be the hub of where a lot of the local families go, a lot of young children go. And I'm wondering if that concept has been looked at.
At this point, no. Just to be honest, it wasn't something that was, I guess, put on the table. And putting all, when I'll say this, putting the cards on the table, is that playgrounds are really expensive. And so this has been something, and this is something that drives the discussion, not just playgrounds, but some of these plazas and things like, they tend to be the most expensive parts of park development. And so we were thinking that it would be the play structures existing and potentially additional would be the focus, and not necessarily a spray park. But again, no idea is a bad idea. So if that's something that we look around and we say that that's not in the town and it's something that should be considered, we can certainly have that discussion. At that point, we really need to be sort of cognizant of budget, though. Obviously, those are major dollar infrastructure investments when we talk about spray parks and playgrounds. So if it's something that everybody, the inputs coming back to us are that this is something that should really be considered, then absolutely, that would be a spot. That it would be a potentially a great amenity for the locals. I'm not sure if I answered your question very well, but yes, maybe. Yeah, no, it hasn't been considered to this point. I can't even remember if we'd had that discussion, to tell you the truth, Aaron and Bill, but it's on the meeting notes now, so we'll have a talk about that.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I think exactly, raise the ideas here that this is not exactly the wish list, but I think a part of, so you've raised two different ideas. As Rob said, they're sort of, we've got them down in notes, and I'm sure the team will take that away. I think sense of scale might be important. Rob gave a little bit of an indication there that, the hardscaped items are the most expensive, obviously. And spray parks. Rob, can you give an order of magnitude for a small spray park installation and a large spray park installation cost? Because that will influence council's guidance on the range of budget that they might be willing to consider.
Yeah, large spray parks are multi-million-dollar ventures. Between the surfacing and all the infrastructure that has to go in, and the features themselves. Small spray park, you're probably, and it's like, well, what's big and what's small? I'd say if it had, let's say it would have 6 or 8 features in it, something like that. You're probably talking, probably about $250,000 between the features and the infrastructure going in. I mean, that's just saying if you had a contractor come in and do it, like it's supply and installed by somebody else. So there's always different ways that these things, especially, where you have a group like the Lions Club involved, getting things done through community involvement. But yeah, you're over a couple $100,000 for sure for something like that.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Through you to the presenters, thank you both very much. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Aaron, for those presentations. But rather than focus right now on sort of scale and budget items, I'd like to take just a step back and ask some questions about both timing and vision. With respect to the Lions Park, I like the concept. It is a really well-used playground now. I live nearby, and the use has increased over the last couple of years tremendously. And it's really fulfilling to see the community using that space. And so to improve it as a playground is wonderful. But I wonder, in terms of what Parks Canada plans for housing development on the south side, so the other side of Turret Street from that park. I believe that I had seen some indication that maybe that segment of Turret Street might even disappear, and there would be a loop around at the end of Tonquin. And so that could impact potential development plans for the Lions Park. And I just wonder whether it might be wise at this time to confirm with Parks Canada what their residential development plans are, so that we can better utilize all of the land that might be available. And maybe you've already had those discussions and you're ahead of me. So that's Lions Park. With respect to Robson Park, it seems to me that this is a huge opportunity for council and the community. Previous council indicated that in a very general sense, they thought that Robson Park should be a park for cultural opportunities to augment the cultural center where council is sitting today. And so we've installed a post there to commemorate our relationship with Hakone, and we've generally thought of enhancing cultural opportunities, and that can include the skating rink that we've put in. I really like the idea of the plaza and being able to accommodate, say, the farmers market there. That's also a cultural opportunity in a sense. So that is there. But what has occurred to me is that a week ago, we celebrated National Indigenous Peoples Day on Robson Park. And that was the first time in my recollection that we had hosted an event of that nature in that location. And it was tremendous. And it seems to me now that we have an opportunity potentially to indigenize that space and to rename that space and take a significant step toward reconciliation. And so I'm wondering what our experts' views would be in the cost of indigenizing that space and to allow it to become still the same sort of cultural idea that council had intended, but with a real focus on the far past, our Indigenous history, and using that space as it was used on Tuesday to celebrate our Indigenous heritage here. And would that be compatible with the design that you've already come up with?
Well, you know, to try to answer what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, is that I think there's different levels of what you're sort of describing, the way I understand it, between renaming something or incorporating so that's the lowest, I'll call that the one layer. Towards the top layer would be incorporating design componentry or a design that is referential to native design, or they have provided design inputs. That would be the top, you know, so where the design reflects Indigenous culture versus a renaming. I guess our thinking was that it would be a completely the space, and I think, you know, we're talking about the plaza specifically, or you know that's kind of the focus, I think, of what you're mentioning, is that it's accommodating and inclusive and non sort of the language of the design is not meant to speak to one culture or another culture. It's basically a design that accommodates and doesn't discriminate from anybody, whether it's cultural or individual, you know, physical issues, right? Mobility challenges, things like that. So, and it's safe for everybody. You know, there's always the layer of septed, you know, those kinds of things. So I think our sort of approach was going to be that it's an inclusive space, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to look like, you know, necessarily reference any colonial past or any Indigenous past, but it was simply going to be a gathering space. I guess is trying to answer, I think, of what you're saying, but it'll be able to accommodate events. And if one of those events happens to be the, you know, celebration of Indigenous Day, that's great. It will accommodate that in a non-discriminatory way.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. And you're right. It is the space and the use of the space that matters. And just for clarity, and not so much for you, Rob, but for others, I'm not talking about replicating what Parks Canada is doing, but they are building an exhibit to honor Indigenous culture. But an exhibit is different than a space. And you're right, an inclusive space is what I'm looking for, but with a focus. And I hear, and I'm not an expert, but I hear of opportunities to decolonialize spaces and to indigenize spaces. And I don't know what that means from a design perspective. And so I turn to you. But if it is simply an inclusive space, then what you have proposed looks to me like it certainly would include an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous culture in that space.
And to be honest, we're not in that level of detail yet. At this point, the exercise is just saying, you know, our objectives are to get feedback on what should go in that space, or, you know, what can this space be used for? And this type of feedback is exactly what we're looking for. the detailed design or the conceptual design could talk to things, you know, if we want to go down that road of having the state, you know, whoever would be representation or represent the local indigenous groups, of some type of component that would go in there. And that could mean something as simple as paving patterns that are a reflection of native culture or things like that, right? So there's very subtle ways of paying respect to the area and the users of the area, or even potentially the users of the space itself. So I think that's kind of where we're going now, into talking about those kinds of levels of detail and what, you know, what everybody would like to see as part of these park designs.
And I think, Mayor Ireland, I think that's a great flag for us on the community engagement component as well, and making sure that we have kind of the Indigenous rights holders perspective in the designs of both parks. And we'll work with Bill on their community engagement process.
I hope I answered your question. Sorry, it's a challenging. I've gone through this on a couple of other projects too. It's a very challenging topic, in the sense that you're trying to pay respect, but you have to be very careful on how you get the input from the local Indigenous groups and how it's represented in the designs as well. So
I agree. It's a challenge, and I'm happy to leave it to professionals like you to start out. And I recognize that you start with a rectangle that is probably the essence of colonialism, and then you're expected to somehow perhaps indigenize that. But it's worth thinking about now, because this opportunity will be before us once, and I think that it might be wise of us to take a close look at it. Anyway, I thank you both. I thank you, Aaron, for your response as well. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Hall, and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I have a couple of comments and a question about funding. I do agree with Councillor Kelleher about skating rinks. I think it's really important that we have these parks in town that are used for 5 months out of the season because it's winter. For the other, whatever 12 minus 5 is. But the skating rink, I drove by and went by Robson Park a lot this winter, and there was those fire pits going and family skating. It was really a nice, it was great because it just put that space into year round. Years ago, I'm not really sure how long, but the Lions Park, actually, I believe the fire brigade would flood the basketball court for a skating rink on that side. And that area is full of families. And when I read sledding hill potentially in the Lions Park, again, opening up these outdoor zones to year-round use makes a lot of sense to me. The basketball courts, a bit near and dear to my heart because my son plays, and I know that there's been, in the past, tons of adults that play too, and to increase more opportunities for inexpensive adult recreational opportunities, like our volleyball program we have. I could see getting a basketball program, that would be amazing. I also think we should really consider putting like both these spaces, community gardens. We had a presentation earlier today that there's a need for that. That would be something I'd like to see. And then as far as funding, I don't know if this was answered when Councillor Wilson talked about it earlier, but like, I'm all about go big, because to me, $500,000 over 10 years doesn't really seem like a ton. Is that a lot of? Is that hard on the taxpayer? Is that hard? I just need someone to tell me if that's a lot or too much or too little, or because it doesn't, to me, I'm like, oh, 50 grand a year and a couple grants in there, great, let's go for it.
CAO Given.
Yeah, I think, and other council members might remember this better than I do. And Ms. Malmchek isn't here, but I believe a 1% property tax increase right now is about $90,000. So $90,000 of new spending in 1 year would be a 1% increase. So about so 50,000 is about a 0.5% increase, and so you do that once, and you'd have that $50,000 to repeat every future year, right? So it's about a 0.5% just in terms of scale. I think, gives you a little bit of sense. Now, whether that's tolerable or not, or whether it's appropriate or not, is a whole other discussion. And that's certainly what council considers when you do the overall budget review in the fall and see all of the different projects and demands in context, you know, and can make a sort of a holistic decision about relative priorities of different things that are both important out in the community, but for different purposes. And that's
Councillor Wilson.
A few things to speak to. I guess the first one would just be to WSB know that we had a World Tree organization or World Tree Group over the last, I think now 4 years in Robson Park. So from the latter part of November straight through till late January. There's a few events focused around a World Tree, and there had been some discussion about installing a permanent tree rather than harvesting and relocating every year, because it's pretty challenging, 30, 40-foot tree relocated every year. So that may be something. I'm not suggesting that it needs to be, but they're great events, and it is something that has been happening in Robson Park over the past 4 or 5 years. So just to bring that to your attention, and then I guess the other item I wanted to speak to was that I've spent the last 10 years at Lions Park, and I feel like it's a great park. I wouldn't want a massive overhaul of that park, and so I think we have to. The council has to talk about priority and what we think we need to focus on first. And I wouldn't want to split the two projects, split financing both projects without kind of prioritizing what does need more attention in the short term. And I would almost lean towards Robson Park may need more attention in the short term, and leaning towards suggesting that we put more focus on one project rather than splitting focus between two. I would hate, and it is just, and I know that we're not speaking this way, but looking at the funding scenarios, I would hate to see this draw out for 10 years. Like projects that I really don't want to get on board to a project that's going to be, well, we'll do this year, and then we're going to have funding next year for this. And so in reality, from the public's view, the project just goes on and on and on. And it's never like this great, come in, get the project done. Oh, wow, look at Robson Park. It's usable now 2-3 years later. That's what I would like to see. And then I would like to then say, okay, let's tackle Lions Park. Because honestly, in my mind, Lions Park is awesome. I'm sure there's some dated things or apparatuses. I think some of them have been removed because they were from the 50s. I think Richard Ireland probably played on them when he was young. But some of those are now gone. But it's a great park, and I would like to see one project tackled, knocked out of the park. We have this great space, and then move on to another project.
I'll just take this opportunity to speak to your comments, Rob, on having some naturalized playground type of facilities, and to express my appreciation for that. I think that we do have a unique and special place in Canada, and I would love to see us have a more natural approach, and a natural and unique approach to our playground development. And so I wanted to express my appreciation for those comments.
Thank you. I do want to say too, I'm provoked, that I even said to Aaron, didn't I say to you, Aaron, on going back to the Robson Park comment, maybe it's a spot that you could put up, I use the term Christmas tree, sorry. But they could be planters that might have perennial areas or annual areas. So it was very interesting to hear that feedback on yeah, I think you used the term world tree. So I think it was the same thought process. So sounds like we're aligned on some things here. And thank you for that. Yeah, I think that something that speaks to the unique character of Jasper. I've worked there enough times now to know it's very unique. And you guys are proudly unique. You're not Banff, you are Jasper, and you are a unique town, and you have your own character and your own history.
Are there any other questions? Do we have a councillor? Oh, sorry, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, through you to Mr. Given, just picking up on Councillor Wilson's point. Are the funding scenarios intended to cover both parks at the same time? Is that what we read into that? So $50,000 a year, for example, over 10 years for both Robson Park and Lions Park?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, Your Worship, no, there really are illustrations of money spread over time. And we're interested to get council's direction. You know, if council said, we feel like a, provisional capital budget of, capital target, I won't even say budget because it isn't a budget. Provisional capital target of $250,000 per park over the next 10 years. That would be enough guidance. And to Councillor Wilson's point before about sequencing, I think that that's heard and understood, and administration would consider that when we propose something to your budget. The numbers, Your Worship, that are in the presentation are simply dollar value split over time. I think the essential question is, roughly speaking, how much would you imagine being comfortable investing into each park? And should administration and the project team be planning to attempt to secure external funds, or are these exclusively internal funds? Because we are in less control of the projects if there's some expectation that a certain element is going to be funded by external grants or contributions. We just aren't in control of when that would happen. So I think we would be happy to have some guidance from council on whether you see these as two $250,000 projects, two $500,000 projects, one project that is $750,000 at Robson Park, and another project that is $500,000 at Lions Park. Like, really, and again, I can't emphasize enough, we aren't looking for approval of a budget, and we are at such a high level of conceptual design here that we can't be costing this right now. But we're looking to ensure that our aspirations don't get ahead of what your expectations are. So anything that you can give us in terms of guidance would be helpful.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Well, I don't think in the position today to suggest that, I'm on board with a certain amount. But honestly, I would lean towards, we have a very small amount of green space and parks in our community, and I think we should be committing large amounts to optimizing them. So I would lean towards the larger amount, but today I'm not comfortable saying, yeah, I'm on board with the 500,000 over 10 and then 500 fundraising. We'll probably lean towards that, but today I wouldn't say that I'd be able to fully commit to that.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, if I may, even that kind of indication is helpful at this level of design, just helping administration projects and get a bit of a sense. And so, we even sort of a round table that just sort of saying, yeah, what Councillor Wilson said sounds about right, or no, I would be more comfortable on the higher end, or I might be more comfortable. Even just sort of that conversation would give us something to work off of.
Councillor Keller-Harvey.
I'm in agreement with Councillor Wilson. we have very little green space. If we're gonna go on a project, let's do it right. I'd hate to say, okay, spend 250 and fix the park, and 5 years from now, we're gonna come back and it's like, just like, I'm gonna use the spray park, or if the Lions Club or the Rotary Club said, well, we would have funded that. Why not investigate that before we make any decisions to see actually what the community wants, what are some of our groups willing to work with us on the sponsorship. You know, it's a great opportunity for the community to be involved and for our partners and user groups, you know. Maybe somebody's willing to do a fundraiser, maybe one of our corporate companies are willing to sponsor something. I think, you know, this is the time to investigate before we commit any money.
Does anyone have prepared to make a motion of any sort?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, just to assist council, maybe, you know, at this stage, certainly the RFD is written up in such a way that it had kind of given an option for council to give a bit more of a specific recommendation. I think you've given us enough input that there's that we shouldn't, at this stage of development, limit our aspirations by finances, is I think what I am kind of sensing. We will be mindful of our capacity to actually do things, so we don't come with anything that's too out of scale. And phasing can be a way to handle some of those finance issues. So I think we've heard that. I don't think we need a specific motion to give direction on that. I think a motion receiving the presentation for information is probably all that's required. We'll take away what we've heard from you and incorporate that into the next round of planning that will happen. And then you'll see this naturally as it progresses through that timeline and project plan that you're identified. So just that motion to receive for information. This dialogue, I think, has been really helpful.
Okay, and I think I'll just take this opportunity also to express to agree with Councillor Wilson and Councillor Keller MP that parks are very important, play a very important role in community life. And I think I was particularly struck by your comment about newcomers learning to skate and demonstrating the community coming together and ways to enjoy winter, I think, are important elements. So I'll leave it open now to someone to make a motion.
Doesn't sound like a motion.
Councillor Wilson.
I would make the motion that committee receive the presentation on Robson Park and Lions Park planning process for information.
Any debate? All in favor?
Wait.
Oh, sorry. I was watching and I missed. Please go ahead, Mayor Ireland.
I would, excuse me, I would just propose adding, if Councillor Wilson will accept it as a friendly amendment, adding that committee direct conceptual plans be developed in a scale reflective of today's committee of the whole discussion, so that there is some ongoing direction for council, or for administration to continue, but removing the reference to any particular funding scenario, but consistent with what Mr. Given has indicated he heard in any event.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would accept that amendment. Thank you.
If there's any other further comments, okay, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you both, Rob and Aaron, for your presentation. It was interesting and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for all the feedback.
Our pleasure.
Okay. Bye.
I would propose we take 5 to 10 5-10 minute break? How long?
10.
10? Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break now. Thank you. Call the meeting back to order, and I believe we go on to 7.2, the Jasper Food Bank. CAO, Kevin, you may have things to tell us there.
Yes, Deputy Mayor Waxer, I believe Mr. Greathead, the Director of Operations and Utilities, is also online. This is his report, so I'm going to pass it over to John to introduce it. This comes from a request Council received in terms of correspondence on May the 3rd. So John, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Good morning, Deputy Mayor and Council. This request was from the food bank to help with their operations by picking up the cardboard. Currently, they're having issues collecting the cardboard and then finding a suitable place to drop it off. As we were trying to address a matter of service creep, we had to assign a cost to it and see what our level of effort would need to be. And so we figured that the request would consist of about 10 to 20 minutes per week for us to pull a vehicle over and collect the cardboard. And that worked out to about $1,700 per year. Seeing as the United Church does have a utilities account, and they pay for their commercial cardboard, but the Jasper Food Society is a separate entity operating out of the United Church. That's where we noticed that there's a differentiation between the services, and we brought it back using the relationship with external groups policy F104. We don't see that this request is very problematic. And so the administrative recommendation is that committee recommend council approve the request from the Jasper Food Bank to pick up cardboard on site and direct administration to provide the service at no cost. The alternatives are that committee recommend council approve the request from the Food Bank Society to pick up the cardboard and establish a fee to provide the service, or that committee receive this report for information and direct administration to advise the Jasper Food Bank to bring its cardboard waste to a community recycling bin. And those are the three options that are in front of council today.
Any questions for Director Greathead? Any comments? Councillor Kelleher.
I'd just like to thank Mr. Greathead for taking our direction and putting this report together. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just out of interest, sorry.
Councillor Wilson.
Just out of interest, that you've referenced the external groups policy F-104. Did this need to come to council for approval yet? Yeah.
CAO Given.
Yeah, Director Greathead, I can take that one for you if you like. Yes, Councillor Wilson does, as referenced in Director Greathead's report. This comes under row B, which is non-financial or staff labor support for an ongoing activity. Because it's an ongoing activity, not a one-time activity, the new policy that council recently adopted requires that this does need council approval, and that the roles need to be established in writing. And so upon council approval, would informally establish the roles of what the Food Bank Society could expect from us and what we would expect from them in terms of where they need to place the carpet. So you can imagine sort of those little minor operational details that we would record that somewhere so that it's down in, on paper or digitally somewhere for future reference. But because it is for an ongoing activity, that's our council approval. And that's why we're looking for the motion that's contained in the report as the recommended item.
Any other questions, comments? Would Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, if there aren't any, I would make a motion that committee recommend council approve the request from the Jasper Food Bank pick up hardware on site and direct administration to provide this service at no cost.
Any debate? We'll call the question then. All in favor? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on then to item 7.3, Activity Center Renovation Project Update. CAO Gibbon, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I believe Mr. Reid may be here. I think he's also out of office, and so might be challenging for him to connect. But the RFD in front of you includes what will become a regular report to Council on the status of the Activity Center renovation project. As Council is well aware, this is a very significant capital item in the area of approximately $14 million. And we want to ensure that both Council and the community are informed of the project and its progress at appropriate stages. So we would expect to bring you this template report on a quarterly basis that would show you recently completed activities, currently underway activities, and upcoming activities. So Council can get a bit of a sense of the pace of the project. At this stage, the project is on target for budget, although it is a very, very early stage before we've actually gone to tendering out any of the actual construction. We have completed the procurement of the prime consultant, as you know. The building condition assessment has been completed in the scope validation. That's the direction that Council had given us around the scope. The project team is in the middle of schematic design, and which will lead the ultimate development and design of the construction project. We have posted a request for proposals for construction manager. Administration is currently assessing the proposals that were submitted, and will likely be coming forward to you with a recommendation to award that portion of the project to a construction manager to work together with the design team. And the intent here is to ensure that the construction manager comes on at an early stage so that they can influence the design based on their sort of analysis of constructability and materials and availability of parts and everything else. So Council can expect to see that coming. And then relatively early in July, once the schematic design is done, our cost consultant will do a Class D cost estimate, which is a further refinement of the cost estimate. And again, not a final, but a further refinement as we move along that scale towards more detailed design and ultimate tendering. And we are working with Parks Canada in terms of consulting on our development permit applications that will be required. Obviously, some of that is influenced by design and setbacks and other items. But that work is currently underway with Parks Canada. Our prime consultant will ultimately develop a set of development permit drawings and prepare the application, which we intend to submit by early August. So that is a very brief overview. Council can expect to see that award of construction manager as the next thing that would show up at the Council table, needing formal Council approval. And as we get through the next stages, will come to you as appropriate. And at minimum, we'll be coming with these quarterly updates to keep you apprised of the project.
Any questions? Councillor Wilson.
I would make the motion that committee receive the June 2022 Activity Center renovation progress update for information.
Any debate? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you, CA. Good. Move on to then 7.4 policy review priority. Let's turn again over to you.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Last term, Council approved the the policy development and review policy, which really identified how the change there was in that we would regularly review existing policies. This Council has approved the removal of a number of policies that had been identified by administration, and administration is now seeking some guidance on where we should expand our efforts. We have a number of different policies. The intention is to go through all of them in the course of the 4-year cycle, but obviously we have decisions about where we want to start. On the most recent time this came forward at the May 17th meeting, Council directed administration to return to a committee of the whole with an updated priority review list. And so administration is here with that. And the next steps really are subject to what council decides are the top priorities. So you'll see the revised priority list as proposed by administration, and we're certainly here to take direction from council. The first item is the interim electronic meetings of participation policy. That is, by definition, an interim was intended to be an interim policy, and we've obviously moved to a stage where electronic meetings of participation are a very regular part, an ongoing part of council business. And so administration identified that as a bit of a administrative exercise and something that influences how council currently operates, could be at the top of the list. The next is citizen engagement, obviously a highly public-facing policy in that it defines how we interact with residents and the public. This one would take more significant administrative effort to revise, but we appreciate it, and administration believe we heard from council this was a high priority, and so it is near the top of the list. The debt and reserve limits policy, administration has seen a number of opportunities to improve that. Our reserve policies, likely splitting this into 2 different areas, a debt policy and a reserve policy or policies. And that obviously is important as we head into budget and our financial considerations. And then you can see the rest of the list there. Again, administration would be happy to take any direction from council, appreciating that the goal is to proceed through all of the policies in the course of the term, subject to administrative capacity. And this is simply a provisional list. We're looking for council confirmation that this list is acceptable at this time. And administration would start at the top of the list to work our way through. You can also see that B021, the interim electronic meetings, is really within that protected and legislative services area. Citizen engagement would likely be in that legislative services area. Communications, debt reserve limit would be finance and administration. Joint use of municipal facilities would probably be a community development. So there was a bit of an attempt from administration to ensure that we didn't do all the finance policies first, just in terms of the burden and challenge that would be within that service area. So we are trying to split that across a number of different service areas so that we've got something for each area we're working on, because we do imagine this to be a concurrent process where if council says, yeah, that looks like the right priority list, administration would start on multiple tracks, operations and utilities working in their area, finance administration working in their area, and then those coming as they're ready to council. So it's there for council consideration, and the recommendation is that committee recommend council approve the policy review priority list.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, would someone like to make the motion? Councillor Kelleher MP.
The committee recommends council approve the policy review priority list as presented.
Any debate? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Motion carried. Next item, 7.5, appointments to commercial use of public space. Task Force.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. 7.5 and 7.6 are both similar. 7.6 was the item that was added. Both are seeking council appointments to committees. Administration isn't suggesting that we need to identify the specific council members today in either case. On item 7.5, which is in front of us, Council has recently established the Commercial Use of Public Space Task Force. I won't go through the purpose of the task force, and council members are well aware of that. We have reached out to our partners with the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism of Jasper, who have both identified their representatives. We need council to identify who its representatives will be. The recommendation in the report is that committee recommend council appoint members of council as recommended by the mayor. And so if this motion went forward, then obviously Mayor Ireland would be able to consult with council members who may have the time and interest to be able to serve on that committee. And then at the regular council meeting next week, we could sort of fill in the blanks on those appointments.
Any, so Mayor,
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I asked that this matter be put on the agenda today to allow councillors an opportunity to consider one of the alternatives. And not that I'm recommending it, but my initial inclination would be that appointments to the task force would be appointments of councillors. There is an opportunity to appoint members of administration. And I would like councillors to consider that, and whether that might be an avenue to the end that we're seeking. And if it is not, if we are to appoint councillors, I know I have heard from Councillor Demota that he wished to be appointed. I'm interested in knowing whether there are others who are similarly inclined, or the reverse, that would prefer not to be appointed. I will tell you that just based on committee assignments and board assignments to date, and to equalize workload to some extent, probably Councillor Keller-Harempe and Councillor Demota would be in line to be appointed to the task force. I know that, well, as I said, Councillor Demota is interested in any event. Councillor Keller-Harempe, you have fewer assignments, but they are probably more time intensive than others, and a bunch of them are out of town as well. So I appreciate constraints on you. Councillor Melnick, on the other hand, has the most appointments of anybody, followed by Councillor Hall. So it's somewhere in the middle, but I am open to recommendations. I do want to get on with this next week, but I wanted just to have an opportunity to have councillors give some thought to whether they would be comfortable having me appoint, or having council appoint, members of administration to the task force rather than councillors, or if we're going to stick with councillors who might be interested in the assignment.
any comments? Councillor Wilson?
I'm not adverse to the assignment. If Councillor Keller-Harempe seems like you have a big workload right now.
I have a big workload right now, some personal commitments, so I'll be quite happy if Councillor Wilson wanted to take that position instead of me.
Yeah, as long as nobody else feels like they want to, I would volunteer then. I could take that position.
Speaking to what Mayor Ireland said, are there any comments on the potential of having administration? Councillor Wilson?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
I believe Mayor Ireland had asked about the possibility of having one of the members being administration. I just wondered if there was any comments, just so that we followed up on everything that he said.
Well, I wouldn't want to take the position away from administration, because I think administration may have more input than myself on that.
CAO.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, administration is completely happy to provide a support role. I think we could provide inputs to the committee, and background information as required or requested. And that's probably the appropriate role. We did want to include that as an alternative. It's possible. You can see that it's not what we recommended, because we think that this really is an inherently political process that needs to happen, where there's going to be trade-offs. And that's probably most appropriate to have council members there. We did identify it as an alternative if there was not capacity within the existing council members to fill those spots. It sounds like there likely is capacity and interest from council members, and that probably is most appropriate.
Mayor Ireland.
Oh, I am content with that discussion. I appreciate the opportunity. And if a councillor can move the motion as recommended, then next week I can recommend 2 councillors to be appointed. We have 2 positions, and as I understand it, 2 volunteers. So I think it'll be an easy task next week.
Councillor Keller Herndon.
I move that committee recommend council appoint members of council as recommended by the mayor to represent the municipality on the commercial use of public space task force.
Any debate? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. On to 7.6. Appointments to Emergency Advisory Committee.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Wax. I'm not sure if Director of Protective and Legislative Services is on the line. If she is, then I'll turn this over to her. Very similar to the last report, we're simply seeking council appointments to this committee. Director Nadon can maybe provide the context for council about where this committee's sort of popped up from, and why appointments to it are of such high importance. Just look to see, and again, she may or may not be there, and if she's not, that's okay. Obviously, contained in the report, council will know that we recently approved the renewed emergency management bylaw number 247. In there, it identifies the establishment of the Emergency Advisory Committee, which is intended to be a committee of council. Previously, under our old practice, all members of council had been members of the Emergency Advisory Committee. Under the new bylaw, the Emergency Advisory Committee is the mayor and 2 members of council. And so, given where we are in the hazard season, administration wanted to bring this to council's attention. We need to fill those positions so we can have a first meeting of the committee. The Emergency Management Agency, which is the administrative body, has had 1 meeting and is looking forward to bringing an update to the committee about our preparations for this year, and to get this into a bit of the regular process of council. This is something that we would normally see at the organizational meeting of council, but since the bylaw was adopted after the organizational meeting, that's why it's arrived here today.
Are there any comments, questions? Would someone then like to make the motion? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I do like to make a motion that committee recommend council appoint members of council as recommended by the mayor to represent the municipality on the Emergency Advisory Committee.
Any debate? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. We'll move on then to correspondence from the Jasper Home Accommodation Association. CAO given, perhaps you can speak to that.
Sure. Just briefly, Deputy Mayor Waxer, Council is well aware of the recent discussion around private home accommodations and the proposal from Parks Canada. Last week, we received correspondence from Parks Canada that the current moratorium on new applications still exists, and that Parks intends to bring forward a new proposal sometime in the next, in the foreseeable future. The correspondence that you see in your package is from the Jasper Home Accommodation Association. And I believe that this was general correspondence, simply stating their position. They do identify that they look forward to collaborating with the municipality to work towards a common sense resolution. Council will also know that on our motion action list, administration is going to be coming forward to you early next month. We expect our first committee of the whole meeting with some recommendation on how we should be developing our municipal opinion. So I think that this item is correspondence for information. I don't see that there's any particular actions arising from it, other than to acknowledge the opinion and position of the Home Accommodation Association, and that council can consider that when the administration comes forward with recommendations on how to develop our municipal position.
That being said, is there any questions, concerns? Would someone like to make the motion here? Councillor Kelleher.
I make the motion that we accept the letter from the Jasper Home Accommodation Association for information.
Any debate? Call the question. All in favor? Move on then to the motion action list. CAO Griffin.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. We do have some updates in your copy in your agenda package. You'll see that we're proposing to advance a couple of items next month. Those are the discussion around S block parking, starting at Snakes Hill. Those will be coming forward in July. Parcel GB development information, we'll also forward that to July. Administration has been in discussion with Parks, and it sounds as though the applicant is nearing the end of their approvals process. When that approvals process is concluded, then administration will be able to bring something forward. So we're still tracking that, but that is not complete. Items that were completed today include the Jasper Food Bank item that was promised for June and has been delivered, as well as the policy review priority list. Again, that's another item that was completed today. And previously completed was the inquiry of Parks Canada about the status of the moratorium. That item has also been concluded and could be removed from the list. And so those three changes to dates for the first three items, and the deletion of the food bank item, the policy review priority list, and the private home accommodation new licenses item, were all ones that the administration would recommend could come off the motion action list.
Any questions or comments? Would someone like to make a motion that we approve the updated motion action list? Councillor Hall.
I would make that motion. Oh, it's not working. I would make that motion. It's not working. It's red, isn't it? Yeah. I would make that motion that we approve the updated motion action list.
Any debate? All in favor? The next item on the agenda is council representation on various boards and upcoming meetings. Has anyone, does anyone have something to report? Councillor Kelleher.
Last Wednesday, I attended another meeting through Zoom, and at that meeting, we approved the next 4-year plan for evergreen, the business plan going forward.
Thank you. Are there other reports? Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Demota and myself last Thursday attended the Community Futures West Yellowhead AGM.
in Rule? Nothing to report.
And I can report that I attended Dakota Roche's graduation and spoke on behalf of the mayor and council, and I can report that it was a very well orchestrated event, complex in the sense that it was only one graduate, and but they did a beautiful job of making it full of pomp and circumstance, as you would expect a graduation ceremony to be. Mayor Ireland, do you have any?
I do, yes. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I can report that tomorrow afternoon, I plan to speak to the other graduating class, Jasper Senior High School. There may be one interested counselor in attendance for that. Thursday morning, I have a Zoom call scheduled with the mayors and CAOs of Jasper, Banff, and Canmore, and a consultant to discuss next steps that we might take with respect to our efforts to achieve resort status and tools within the provincial context. So I can give you a report sometime thereafter. And just a reminder that we do have a Teams meeting scheduled for Monday morning with Minister Shandro, primarily to speak about the Alberta Policing Service and our position with respect to that. So I haven't checked to see whether all councillors have been able to find time to attend, but my recollection is that all of council is invited to attend that virtual meeting on Monday, and I think it is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that is it for me for upcoming meetings.
Okay. We have a list of upcoming events, which we do have that extra meeting that is not on that list, but that will be, we've all been reminded. Is there any additions? Okay, we will move then to, can I have a motion to move in camera? Councillor Kelleher. And we do not anticipate there will be any further business after the